Howdy, folks. We're back. The episode 59, Voodoo Economics. Ford ad hits World Series Grand Slam. Yay!
Yeah,
Go Toronto.
for those that don't know, Canada and the U.S. are in a trade war, and the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has been rather vocal about how to treat Trump's behavior, and outrageously took out a $75 million ad campaign featuring Ronald Reagan, and of course broadcasted on the first World Series, and is intending to broadcast it again on the game this Sunday. It apparently got Trump's attention.
Yes, it sort of did. He kind of threw a tantrum late at night saying he's breaking off all negotiations with Canada. How dare you embarrass them in front of the American people and educate the American people that their previous president was not into tariffs.
For those who don't, follow Ontario politics, Doug Ford isn't the brightest light on the Christmas tree, and you probably wonder how how he came up with this idea. Well, the Chinese already ran the same clip of Ronald Reagan back in April when they were in the midst of their trade negotiations with the Americans. And for those that don't know, Ronald Reagan brought in a set of policies that later became known as Reaganomics. Reaganomics was labeled as Voodoo Economics by his successor, Bush. Now, for those that don't remember, or don't know, or don't care, the U.S. was in a bit of a recession. It was called stagflation. Nothing was moving. Inflation was going up, wages were going up, unemployment was going up. Everything was counter to what usually happens in American or capitalist economic policies. So Reagan brought in policies that essentially had big tax cuts to the rich, big tax cuts to the corporations, and he did he opposed tariffs, but he was in a bit of a dust up with Japan over semiconductors, and he brought in tariffs. His quote was, with respect to tariffs, high tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and triggering a fierce trade war. Then the worst happens: markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. Now, Trump looks at Reaganomics essentially as the gold standard for economics. He has given huge tax breaks to the wealthy, to the corporations, and he's violating Reaganomics with tariffs. That's what got him mad.
Well, Reaganomics, when Reagan implemented his policies, he took the corporate tax rate from, it was 70 point something percent for capital gains, and he lowered it down to 20% thereabout. So he gave huge tax benefits to corporations, never before in history. And it came right after the Great Recession of the 1980s. So he was implementing this as a countermeasure to the basic depression of the 80s from 1979 to 1983, where even here in Alberta, real estate values dropped 50%. And they thought it was a great idea to allow corporations to run aspects of the government. And this also happened in Canada. Mulroney, and he had a huge international shipping company. Mulroney wanted to get control of Canada's political system, so he was involved with a lot of people with a lot of money, deep pockets, using his services. He went around at a leadership convention with a brown paper bag full of cash, and he bought the votes to get rid of Honest Joe Clark. And we found this out after the fact, but it shows that politicians and political power was going to be paid and bought by the wealthy. And this is what Reaganomics and Mulroney entered into as a form of conspiracy to take away the power of government, and they entered into a free trade agreement which sold out Canada interests and assets to the U.S. against Turner wishing not to see that happen, and it was against what Prime Minister Trudeau had in mind for Canada's sovereignty and a stronger international standing by distancing ourselves from the United States. And lo and behold, how history turns and makes full circle. Had we listened to our leaders that had wisdom, we might not be in as bad a situation as we are in right now. So I find it hilarious that Doug Ford would be saying he agrees with Reaganomics and how it killed the economies of the world and Canada by giving away all our assets. You have stats on the job losses occurring in Ontario right now from
Well,
this free trade
the au-
agreement? Yeah.
the auto industry and the manufacturing are suffering huge unemployment at the moment, and that, of course, is what got Doug Ford, pissed off basically because it's his province is going to suffer the most from the tariffs. But it's not that Doug Ford is agreeing with Reagan economics. What he's trying to do is, you know, point out to Trump that he's pretending to do this following Reagan economics when what he is doing is not Reagan economics. It's closer to what Bush labeled voodoo economics, and it includes a theory called trickle down. So when the rich get richer, money will trickle down to the peasants at the bottom, and everybody eventually becomes more wealthy. Of course,
It just trickles down to offshore bank accounts, and the
yes,
wealthy get wealthier.
of course that never happened during the Reaganomics either. But what Reaganomics did do is it ran up their deficit with military spending, just like Trump is doing,
Yeah.
and it eventually the U.S. economy worked its way out of that situation. But today's world was much different. Trump inherited a thriving economy from Biden. There was no stagflation. There was relatively low interest rates. So the reason for him following Reagan economics is just lip service. It's
Well,
suiting his
I think
purpose.
it's a great thing that Ford tried to educate the U.S. citizens. I heard he concentrated the ad in mostly Trump support areas of the country, the U.S., and it's sort of an education process. If your infamous leader of the Republican Party was totally against tariffs, hurting your financial status, maybe you'll pay attention. But Trump had to jump on that because he definitely doesn't want an educated voting population that had voted him into power to realize that his policies are only hurting him in the long run and in the short run. So voters might be a little ticked off, and rightly so, but it takes a foreign country to post an ad to try to educate the U.S. citizens. That's the joke of the matter, folks, is their own education system is found wanting, period. Then a foreign country has to try to educate you, and that's what's pissing Trump off, is he likes to believe that all U.S. citizens that support him are dumber than dumb, so he definitely knows that he has to put a stop to that type of promotion, and making the allegations that the Reagan Association in charge of these Reagan documents didn't authorize it has been debunked many times. Midas Touch debunked it. A few other channels debunked it, that the Reagan Foundation allows the reuse and rebroadcasting of Reagan advertising and talking points, so long as you reference that it came from Reagan. So that's a a silly stance by Trump accusing everybody of breaching laws when he's the real lawbreaker and known felon and criminal. So,
Well, one of the other side of the Reagan economics, they call it supply side economics, where the theory is that if you increase the supply of goods and services, you get economic growth. You get economic growth by giving tax deductions to corporations and rich individuals, that they will spend more and create more jobs. And of course, that rarely happens, and so the other side of this is by having tariffs and cutting off foreign imports, there is now the motivation of corporations to increase production to fill in the gap of those missing exports and imports. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months. But Doug Ford, by sticking Reaganomics, up Trump's nose, so to speak, has definitely got his attention. And to call off the trade negotiations with Canada, shows how childish Trump is, and it also shows how, when you're dealing with a psychopath, that you have to be careful which buttons you push, and so it'll be interesting to see when Trump decides to come back to talking to Canada about trade again.
well, I mean, does Canada really need to be pandering to a fella? I mean, I wouldn't allow him into my country if I was prime minister, and I sure as heck would not negotiate with a known felon, liar, cheat. Anything he agrees to is not worth the paper it's written on, and a lot of times it's not even written on paper. And until the courts in the U.S. rule as to whether tariffs are valid under Trump and his fake war on the world, I don't think I would even care to negotiate. So the benefit of Ford's ad is that it's putting up a good wall so we don't have to deal with the moron in the South. And that's exactly what he is. Now, going back to Reaganomics, it was Mulroney, Reagan, and Thatcher were the ones that were promoting that get government out of the way, let the market rule, economic globalization with its program of free trade, privatization, and deregulation, and everyone would benefit. Well, corporations surely did. There was no doubt about that. And when we look at it, we see that that was the starting point of these oligarchs and the wealthy buying politics to ensure that the corporations ruled the roost. And you've seen CEOs have, 300 times wage increases since then, or more, sometimes 1,000%. The minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, and the minimum wage is below equivalent factors for keeping up with inflation. So under Reagan he's the only president in modern history not to set an increase in minimum wage in his term. And that shows you that these people had underlying motives that are the cause of people like Trump to actually come to power. It was the money destabilizing government and trying to deregulate government to allow corporations to make huge profits so that they could also buy the politics and politicians in countries like Canada and the U.S. And we're seeing the effects of that since Reaganomics was implemented. And it surely shows people that this type of government is not something that is democratic. It is money bought and paid for. And Canada lost with its free trade agreement overall because we allowed foreign companies to own our essential services and our resources, especially non-renewable resources. And this will come back to bite us right in the arse, folks. And it has, as you see, that when the profits leave the country, we, the communities we live in, are affected, because for every dollar economy, you get 100-fold effect from it. When that dollar is taken offshore, we don't get the effects of it. And in Alberta, you see a lot of whining, crying little babies that whine and cry that they don't have money and they don't have services and they don't have teachers getting contracts and the health care is cut. But you're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars leaving the province to offshore accounts to foreign companies. So this is what Reaganomics has done. It has basically brainwashed a whole generation or two generations of people to believe that corporations should benefit financially while the rest of us become peons and slaves to the corporations, and that the rich know what's best for you and me, not democracy and government and let's make everybody have equal opportunity and equal rights and equal health care and have a good existence. No. Corporations are exploitive. They are corporations for greed, and the greed sits at the top. It does not trickle down. You do not get trickle-down economics. And look what happened in the U.S. Trump is in power because of money, buying courts, buying the justice system, buying the politicians. Everybody's afraid of Trump because he has a vengeful reputation. He will use his friends and power to destroy you if you speak out against the orange tard. So you have to be careful. And Canada fell into that trap because Canada allowed a lawsuit to go against his Trump Towers, and it ultimately caused the Trump Tower programs in Vancouver and Toronto to shut down, and Trump didn't get his name on those towers. So no matter what Trump says, he'll look you in the eye and kiss your arse. But he is so revengeful, he will do everything in his power to reprimand those that stood in his way or tarnished his name. And that's where Canada has fallen into. And you see it where he illegally prosecutes Comey, and anybody that stood up to him is being prosecuted, hounded, and that's what Canada can expect. So why are we dealing with the U.S.? We should cut all ties and do not renew the Kuzma agreement. Do not allow Canada to be foreign owned by U.S. corporations, and start taking back what's ours. And there's a lot of countries around the world that will buy up all the goods we were shipping to the U.S., and we got a year to readjust where we ship our goods. So that's my take, folks. I could go on and on about Reaganomics because it was a very, very well orchestrated undermining of democracy for the wealthy, and it all starts there.
Well, one of the keystones of Reaganomics was deregulation, and of course, Trump is deregulating a lot of things, but he is also exposing the American public to all kinds of potential health issues, perhaps a new pandemic, and he's also allowing certain industries, promoting certain industries, such as cryptocurrency, which could have a devastating long-term effect on money markets. But when you own a crypto currency, of course, you have a vested interest in loosening the regulations. Reagan's looser regulations led to the savings and loans scandal, where they had bonds that were based on mortgages that were almost non-existent, and created a meltdown in the financial markets. That could happen again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mulroney started to sell off of Canadian Crown corporations and institutions, and he's the one that got rid of these things. Included Air Canada, Petro-Canada, Connaught Laboratories, which was a publicly owned pharmaceutical company where we could have made vaccines for the COVID during this crisis. So, I mean, we have to look at, like even Harper sold off the Canadian Wheat Board to foreign corporations. The reason these people wanted these corporations was so that government didn't have control And if governments don't have control of crown corporations, it forces the voters and citizens to be wage slaves to the wealthy, because you have to pay more in taxes. And the more you have to pay in taxes, the more you have to go out and earn just to put food on your table. And they undermined that knowingly, that they could take the wealth away from a country by selling off crown corporations, which gave higher paying jobs, which they don't want to increase even minimum wage, the corporations. And now the politicians that are owned by the corporations don't want to increase minimum wage to be fair and equitable on the marketplace, so you could have a standard of living and afford to live. They want you to be suffering financially so that you'll work for them for nothing. You'll beg for a job. You'll send out 1,000 resumes, and they'll pick and choose who they're going to hire. Not you saying, hey, I got great credentials. I'll be glad to work for you if you pay me a set wage. That doesn't happen. You're a wage slave because your taxes keep going up and up and up. And they know that's the underlying reason that you're going to be stuck in a job or bouncing from job to job, barely making ends meet for the average person. And that is their goal. Is they don't mind a few people reaching a status of economics that is stable, but they don't want the masses to. And that's why the middle class has been eroded since the 1980s. Gradually eroded down to where we really don't have a middle class, but we sure have huge taxes, folks. Our taxes have gone up astronomically since we sell off our corporations, we sell off our non-renewable resources, and we don't get fair value for them. And then we provide corporate welfare because our politicians, the only way you can get elected in any position of politics in Canada or the U.S. is if you've got hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars backing you to get elected. And I say millions because when you get free advertising during prime TV news supper hour, because the foreign television station wants to give it to you, and it doesn't give it equally to your opposition, they have given you millions of dollars of free advertising that your competition can't get. So you are limited on your exposure to politicians. Therefore, the money tells you who you're going to vote for. And they do it manipulatively so that you feel that you might be participating in a democracy. And I think that, folks, leads us back to the issue of why we only have 30 to 40% turnout for voting, is because voters are becoming apathetic because of the money buying the exposure of the press and influencing our elections, so that only money people have a say, and everybody's getting deterred from coming out and voting because they know it's a rigged system. And that the only way to de-rig the system is to make it mandatory voting and to stop the press from having influence over who's going to be elected, because you need to have equal representation and coverage in the press. And many European countries have already done this to make a fairer political system. And all those countries that have done that, guess what, folks? Free education, free health care, and all this stuff because the people want it for the people. It isn't the money people and the wealthy determine what you get for services and how much more you're going to pay in taxes so they can line their pockets in corporate welfare. So, Reaganomics, big failure. Big failure. But to point out that he wanted free tariffs, low tariffs, was so he could have corporations come into other countries, because the U.S. was an economic powerhouse at the time. And he knew that the multinational corporations could, if there was no tariffs, do deals in foreign countries to take over their assets like they did in Canada. It was not an equal deal between Canada and the U.S. It gave American companies the right and the power to take over our businesses, our assets, and force our taxes up. And it worked extremely well. And hopefully now we learned our lesson. Have we?
I don't know. Canada tried to a form of Reaganomics with immigration, so they attempted to mess with the balance by allowing more immigrants into the country in order to take the lower value jobs and to increase the economic activity. And for a lot of people, they look at that as a failure.
Well, it isn't. I mean, when the COVID crisis hit and our economy worldwide was going down, Canada did better than any other G20 country. And I think I call it the housing market manipulation, because we brought in a lot more immigrants, and that forced a housing boom across the country, which made a lot of people really, really wealthy when their property doubled or tripled or quadrupled in some cases. And it was all due to bringing more people into the country to create a higher demand. And in that capacity, it did keep the economy of Canada strong, but it hurt a lot of locals that didn't see it coming, me being one of them. But, now Canada doesn't really have a manufacturing economy. We have a housing economy where most of the industry and economic growth and expansions is based on building houses for people to live in as rental properties. Instead of owning your own house, you're subjugated to a lot of foreign companies. They're building big multi-complex housing complexes in Canada, backed by the government authorizing it. We have a lot of foreign owners coming in, buying these properties because they know there's a lot of people coming here and will pay huge amounts in rent. Even municipalities are taking advantage of this by increasing the taxes and services on property taxes so that only the wealthy can afford to own a building. And that's not a good economic effect either. So it's having a backlash now. It did keep us strong coming out of COVID, but now it's a detriment to our society with being a housing economy. So there's lots to talk about there.
I think it was a big mistake.
In many ways it was, yes. We'd be further ahead had we looked after our own situations and banned foreign investment and corporate ownership of residential houses. Why do residential houses get to offer businesses a lower tax rate to invest there than you owning a house next door get for tax benefits? So there's a lot of issues there that need to be cleaned up to have a fair chance for people to own their own houses. And yes, folks, when the correction comes, real estate's going to drop astronomically because there's no house worth $1 million, and the average house is pushing upwards of $1 million now in any major urban area. So folks, wake up, smell the coffee. We're all being ripped off by corporate greed and the rich pushing the prices up so that we have to rent from them. And they don't care if you're broke and barely putting food on your table. The price of rent's going to keep going up and up and up because they own the politicians and they own the system now. And that's thanks to Reaganomics. And of course, how do you tariff a house? You can't, folks. There's no tariffability on a house unless you can figure out how to make it mobile. So it can cross international borders. Who's going to win the World Series? Go, Toronto, go.
Yeah, it's a
Doug
good
Ford,
question.
keep slamming those ads.
Yeah, good question. Who's going to win the World Series?
Well, I think Ford won. He hit a grand slam with this ad. It is an eye-opener for the U.S. It's going to cause ripple effects into Canada, and thank you, Ford. I think you did a good deed in my book. At least you're educating the U.S. people.
Yep, and they need to look at that so that, well, it's hard to say. They probably don't even know when they're getting lied to.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Is their whole system is screwed. When you have liar in chief lying all the time, I mean, he's a representative of their parliament system, and he's committing perjury before the courts every time he opens his mouth as a representative of the courts. And I think they need to realize that politicians that lie to the public are lying under oath because they're there representing the highest courts of the land, which is legislative bodies of democracies or even pseudo-democracies. And when you lie to the people, that's perjury, and you should be thrown in jail unless you can substantiate your lies with facts. And that's the new standard of democracy, is holding people accountable to lies. And that's something we as voters and citizens have to do.
So anyways, Doug Ford was a big success in getting the attention of the Americans, or at least Trump.
Well, he
Yeah,
got the attention of Canadians too.
Yeah,
We're
huge
all
success.
aware that there's an ad in the World Series that hit a grand slam against the Americans. Now all we
That's
got to
right.
do is bring the cup home. Go Toronto, go.
I'm not sure it's a cup, but
What is it?
I don't
I'm
know.
not a baseball player, so
I don't know.
there's a
It's a,
there's a
it's
cup
a trophy.
involved.
It's a trophy.
Well, there you go. I like cup, Stanley Cup.
There you go. Okay,
But the
on that
World
note,
Series would be fine.
I'll let you go.
Okay, take care. Make sure you subscribe, like, share. Tell us what you want to hear about, not hear about. Got anything else to add there? Oh yeah, I do. I'm having a hard time getting Pirates of the Caribbean out there, folks. The episode Captain POTUS, the YouTube algorithms aren't pushing it. I can't even get it into the U.S. markets apparently, but we'll see what happens there.
Well, according to the memo, you have to register as a political party.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? YouTube telling me I'm a political party, stating that Captain POTUS is the pirate of the Caribbean, and he might be starting a war with Venezuela, and he's bringing it to the streets of the USA, targeting Latinos and brown-skinned people that speak foreign languages so they can throw them in concentration camps and claim that the invasion has happened in the U.S. and there's never going to be an election ever again in the U.S. And blown up fishermen in the high seas, going for Blackbeard's record as the greatest pirate ever to live, and Captain POTUS is well underway. He's blown up how many ships now? Eight fishermen that they've recorded, and many fishermen have gone missing. Yes, more to be heard here, folks. So watch our series, Captain POTUS Strikes Again.
Well, and none of that, he has no remorse.
No, none. He thinks it's a joke. He likes the press coverage he's getting. But you know what, folks? The U.S. may have to hand over POTUS and his crew of pirates to The Hague, because international law is international law, and people of the world will demand that pirates be handed over. And anybody executing orders from the Captain POTUS is to be held accountable. And they don't have immunity in the U.S., but they definitely do not have immunity in the world in the international court. And that's something that you'll hear us promoting, that Captain POTUS, stand guard, because you will be demanded to be handed over to The Hague for prosecution for blowing up fishermen, especially a fisherman's boat with the engine out of the water in distress that you could have boarded at any time and proven there was drugs. There was no drugs. And the world's seen that footage. So guess what? The Hague, Mr. Trump. The Hague. You're going to have to face The Hague, and any of your pirates and parrots will have to go there too. On that note, have a good day. Halloween's coming up too. Okay. Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. And don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too. Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.